It's one of the hottest debates in sports, the inclusion of transgender athletes in competition. And as Lee Cowan tells us, there are no easy answers.
21-year-old Lucas Draper is not someone you want to challenge in the gym. Just watching his sit-up routine is enough to make your abs hurt. Lucas is a junior on the men's swimming and diving team at Oberlin College in Ohio.
I was in the water before I could walk. I started swimming competitively when I was about 9.
He came here to compete from Australia, but after he broke his hand, he decided that this season he'd just compete on the men's diving team instead. Although you might not recognize him from a distance, that's Lucas in a women's bathing suit.
Do I still wear the women's suit because I haven't had any sort of surgery? I would like to at some point.
The women's suit hides what a men's suit can't. Until last year, Lucas had been competing on Oberlin's women's team. This past November, he began a regimen of testosterone therapy as part of his transitioning to a man.
I was a tomboy from the moment I could walk. I always felt a little bit lost and a little bit like I didn't fit in.
He says he's happier now than he's ever been.
This is the first season that you've been competing as a man. How's it feel so far?
It feels good.
Lucas's transition has been supported by his coaches and by his teammates at Oberlin, but that kind of acceptance isn't enjoyed by all transgender athletes, especially trans women. 22-year-old Lia Thomas is arguably one of the most controversial and yet accomplished collegiate trans swimmers competing today. For 3 years, she swam on the University of Pennsylvania's men's team, but after taking some time off, returned this season to swim with the women. And she has become a phenom.
Nobody will touch Lia Thomas.
In a sport often defined by just fractions of a second, Lia Thomas is sometimes so far ahead she's seen waiting for her competitors to catch up. NCAA rules require trans women athletes to take testosterone suppression therapy for 1 year before competing. Lia Thomas has been on it for twice that long. And while her times have slowed since she was swimming as a man, her winning streak has sparked a firestorm over just how to balance fairness and inclusion.
That is a new Ivy League meet record.
In many sports, men are 10 or 20% better on average. And if you look at the most elite performers, men are far, far and ahead of what women are able to do.
And that's where the fairness question comes in.
Absolutely.
Dr. Michael Joyner is a physiologist who researches human athletic performance at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. After studying Lia Thomas's times from male to female, he says statistically she is an outlier.
The emerging evidence is that there are legacy effects of testosterone, especially people who've been through puberty as males and had exposure to testosterone for prolonged periods of time.
He expects that Lia's testosterone suppressants have indeed lowered her hormone levels down to those of cisgender women. Those are women whose gender identities match the sex they were assigned at birth. But Joyner says that hormone therapy can't reverse everything.
Height's probably not reversible, hand size, foot size. Some of the issues related to muscle mass, lung size, and other things probably are never going to revert completely, if at all.
Trans women will maintain advantages, but are those advantages large enough to preclude meaningful competition? Not clear at all.
Joanna Harper is a visiting fellow studying transgender athletic performance at Loughborough University in England. She wonders if the advantages that trans women may have may also come with some disadvantages.
The bigger bodies of trans women are now being powered by reduced muscle mass, reduced aerobic capacity. That can lead to disadvantages in things like quickness, recovery, endurance, etc.
Her published studies are among the few that have been done on trans athletes, a field that she got interested in as a competitive runner when she began her own transition from a man to a woman back in 2004.
Within 9 months of starting hormone therapy, I was running 12% slower, and that's the difference between serious male distance runners and serious female distance runners. As a scientist, I was intrigued.
She's now in the process of conducting a more long-term study of trans athletes.
Nobody's really done that yet on this scale?
On any scale.
That's in part because transgender people only make up an estimated 1% of the population. Elite trans athletes are only a tiny fraction of that. That said, many in competitive swimming say we don't need exhaustive studies to decipher what they say is plainly evident.
To have somebody competing who does have this unfair advantage, even if they don't win, it still corrupts the field.
Nancy Hogshead Makar won 3 gold medals at the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles.
They think that women should just move over and say, here you go, you take these spots.
She now heads Champion Women, an advocacy group for women's equality in athletics.
Lia Thomas has already greatly impacted women's sports. When Lia's in the finals, it means another woman doesn't make it into the finals.
You're not against trans athletes, you're just against trans women competing in the women's category.
Correct. When it comes to competitive sports is where I would draw the line. I do think that transgender people have a really hard time in society, and I want that to be easier. But we can't ask women to give up what we've worked so hard for so that transgender women are able to compete.
That argument has already forced some changes. This year, mid-season, the NCAA announced that it was abandoning its rules that have allowed trans athletes to compete since 2011. It will now, in the future, leave it up to the governing bodies of each sport to come up with their own rules. At the legislative level, laws that ban trans women and girls from participating in sports are getting more and more common. 22 states have introduced bills just like that this year alone.
These bills are devastating. They are telling trans kids that they do not belong, even the ones who don't want to play sports, because it says, hey, you don't belong in one of the primary activities that children partake in.
Skylar Baylor was the first openly trans man in Division I swimming. He's now an advocate for transgender inclusion.
Is there any middle ground in this debate?
I don't think that there is space to say, yes, I affirm your identity, but I don't in sport. You can't divide me in half and have my transness and my masculinity show up here and not over here.
All season, he's been cheering Lia Thomas on, but he worries if she's excluded from sports, just where does it stop?
At what point is a woman too tall or her hands too big? At what point is a woman not woman enough?
Does she go in with an advantage?
I think biodiversity exists everywhere, and the reality is people win and lose all the time, and nobody considers that unfair until it is a marginalized person, specifically a black or brown woman and or a trans woman.
And you can see and feel the tension in this building.
All eyes were on Lia Thomas recently at the NCAA National Finals, where she didn't break any records, but she did become the first known transgender athlete to win a Division I championship. While some celebrated, others were angry. Clearly, the debate is far from over. As for Lucas Draper, he's really not sure what the answer is. But a willingness, he says, to dive into the debate is at least a start at finding a solution.
People who identify as transgender are very much in the minority. People just don't understand where people like me are coming from.
So where are you coming from?
I just want to be me. And me isn't my private parts. It's who I am inside.